Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. Last time I discussed this topic, I did so with an exceptionally tired brain, which caused me to include some very bad information regarding derivative works to the point where I didn't feel comfortable leaving the video up, so it has since been privated and will remain so. However, with situations such as this, and being I didn't see anyone else taking the time, I decided to revisit this topic, even though the news is definitely long in the tooth, and cover some of the specific allegations that Demetrius Polychron is making in regards to Amazon. So we're going back to the drawing board with this one, and owing to some of the comments on the previous video I saw where I could have clarified some points better, so here we go with what I hope to be the superior version of the video of the lawsuit filed by Demetrius Polychron, who is suing the Tolkien estate and Amazon, along with Jeff Bezos and Simon Tolkien, over Lord of the Rings and the Rings of Power for $250 million. Now, on April 14th of this year, Demetrius Polychron filed the lawsuit alleging that Amazon and the Tolkien estate infringed his copyright and engaged in unfair competition. The copyright claim itself alleges that the Rings of Power series created by Amazon infringes on the novel Fellowship of the King, which, from Demetrius Polychron's website, is the first of a 7-book series titled The War of the Rings. Now, within this lawsuit, Polychron alleges that Amazon and the Tolkien estate, quote, "In writing The Fellowship of the King, Polychron, while admittedly inspired by The Lord of the Rings and J.R.R. Tolkien, developed a wholly original book and concept for the work, including separate and distinct characters and storylines from the Lord of the Rings series. These wholly original, distinct, and separate characters and storylines compose as much as one half of the 8-episode series as released and published by the defendants, meaning Amazon and the Rings of Power. In many cases, the defendants copied exact language from The Fellowship of the King. In other instances, defendants copied images that match the book cover and descriptions as created in the book as authored by Polychron. And in order to determine how a television series that first started being released on September 2nd, 2022 could have infringed on the copyright of a book that was released exactly 20 days later, Polychron was kind enough to provide a timeline. Now, on or about November 21st, 2017, Polychron sent a letter to Tolkien, by which he means Simon Tolkien, the grandson of J.R.R. Tolkien and current director of the Tolkien estate, where within that letter, Polychron had asked Simon Tolkien to review his as-yet unpublished novel, where that letter received no response. Now, 2 years later, in November of 2019, Polychron retained a lawyer to contact Simon Tolkien and the Tolkien estate regarding a potential collaboration with him on his still as yet unpublished novel. Simon Tolkien and the Tolkien estate's own legal team responded to Polychron's lawyers rebuffing his attempt at a collaboration. Then around 1 month later, apparently still not taking the hint, Polychron hand-delivered a copy of his novel to Simon Tolkien, which he had received a copyright registration for, in the hopes Simon would review it and reconsider collaboration. 1 month after that, after once again receiving no response from Simon Tolkien or from the Tolkien estate, Polychron sent one final letter asking for the manuscript to be returned and stating his intention to publish his novel independently. Then, as was stated before, Amazon released The Rings of Power on September 2nd, 2022, and Polychron's book was published exactly 20 days after that. And again, in the allegation, Polychron states that his copyright was infringed by copying exact language, copying of images matching his book cover, and description of characters. However, before we dive into any of the potential validity behind Polychron's claims, there are some glaring issues, or at least potential issues, with Polychron even being able to claim his copyright. Now, we know, or at least I know thanks to having to deal with some litigious crazy people like Acerthorn, that a common law copyright is insufficient for a lawsuit. Now, prior to a suit being made, one must first register the copyright, which Polychron did do back in 2017. However, the copyright registration itself may be potentially misleading in how Polychron filed it, and also we do have to discuss the concept of derivative works. Now, I know I screwed this up badly last time, so trust me, this time I will be correct, as it's not 5 in the morning after less than an hour of sleep, and I have documentation from the US Copyright Office in front of me to keep me from straying too far off the path. So, a derivative work is a concept that is well known within the video games industry. A game mod is a derivative work, and it is the type of derivative work which can create new items, new characters, graphical improvements, new stories, really anything you can imagine. Mods are fantastic things. However, they're still considered in legal terms to be a derivative work. Now, with derivative works, it can get a little complicated. Now first, in order to be fully compliant with the law in terms of copyright, a derivative work would require a license from the copyright owner or whomever has obtained exclusive rights from the original owner. This is, for all intents and purposes, getting permission to play around with somebody else's stuff. However, if the author of a derivative work did not get permission from the original copyright holder, the author of the derivative work still retains a copyright to their original content, which, in the terms of Polychron's novel, would not include Middle-earth, hobbits, Mordor, the Shire, or any original Tolkien characters such as Samwise, Frodo, Legolas, Gimli, Gandalf, Aragorn, Arwen, etc., but he would still hold a copyright over any new characterizations and depictions that were and are uniquely his. And yes, we can tell that his novelizations are a derivative work outside of the fanfic name of the novel, but within the writing itself. And we know this from the Fractal Books website, who are the publishers for Polychron's novel, where an excerpt for the upcoming Book 2 in the series states, "In the last War of the Ring, the battles were confined to Helm's Deep and Rohan, the Pelennor fields around Minas Tirith, and the passage of Cirith Gorgor before the Morannon, the Black Gates of Mordor. Now, from the icy plains of Forodwaith in the north, down through all 4 farthings of the Shire, across the Troll Shaws, past Dol Amroth to Harad in the south and Dor Daedaloth to Hildoria in the east, enemy armies are marching across all of Middle-earth. The forces of the High King Elisar and the High Queen Arwen converge on Khazad-dûm, led by their son, the Crown Prince Eldarion, in co-captaincy with the Crown Prince Legolas of Mirkwood and the Crown Prince Durin VII of Erebor, aided by the wizard Alatar the Blue of Rhûn." So, as I said, clearly this takes place within Middle-earth and Tolkien's world, and makes use of at least some of the original Tolkien characters. Now, the Tolkien world, in terms of legality, is an interesting one, where the Tolkien estate holds the keys to Middle-earth. However, Middle-earth Enterprises, which is now owned by Embracer Group, the same parent company that owns Gearbox Entertainment and THQ Nordic, owns the worldwide exclusive rights to elements of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, namely the names of characters contained within those novels, as well as the places, objects, events, and even some short phrases and sayings. And from Middle-earth Enterprises' own website, they state that if a person wishes to publish a novel for sale, they must obtain permission from HarperCollins publishers. Now, why is that important? Well, it directly feeds back into what I was stating earlier about issues that I see with Polychron's lawsuit in terms of his copyright registration. From the website copyright.gov, it clearly states, to register copyright claims in derivative works and compilations, information will be required regarding previous registrations of pre-existing material, limitations of the claim, the material excluded, and a description of the new material added to the derivative work or compilation. And as we all saw, Polychron is very clearly utilizing people, places, and things from Middle-earth, which are not his own. And even as Middle-earth itself is copyrighted, Polychron would need to have, within his copyright registration, details listing limitations on his copyright to not include the original copyrighted works such as Arwen, Legolas, Middle-earth, Minas Tirith, and the rest, and to clearly state what within this copyright is his own original creation. And this is something that it appears Demetrius Polychron simply did not do when he was registering his copyright back in 2017. So in terms of the validity of Polychron's lawsuit against Simon Tolkien, Jeff Bezos, Amazon, and the Tolkien estate, the lawsuit may simply just outright fail on the face of the copyright registration being potentially invalid. Now, in addition, the Tolkien estate and Middle-earth Enterprises might also have a legal case against Demetrius Polychron if it, as it appears to be, turns out that Polychron did not receive permission from HarperCollins publishers to sell his novel making use of Tolkien and Middle-earth Enterprises copyrighted content. But moving on from there, the lawsuit itself doesn't get much better for Polychron here. He was kind enough to provide a breakdown of alleged infringements, and also, partly because I enjoyed the absolute irony of it, I did purchase a copy of Demetrius Polychron's The Fellowship of the King in hardcover off Amazon before it was removed from the Amazon storefront, likely because Amazon refused to keep selling the book of a person that is suing them for $250 million. So I actually have in hand the tools needed to compare and contrast the allegations made by Polychron within this lawsuit, which is about as hilarious of a comparison as one might expect. So let's go over a few of the examples that Polychron provided within his lawsuit, at least in terms of Rings of Power Episode 1. Otherwise, this would be a 2-hour-long video, and I do have a day job and a daughter to consider, as well as I want to remain respectful to your time as the viewer. So, the first point here. Dragon destroys a great eagle in flames, the exact image of the cover of my book. This one I highly doubt will hold up in court. The scene depicted in the Rings of Power shows numerous dragons and eagles in aerial combat, where the dragon that is the focus for this grabs an eagle and hurls it to the ground, igniting the eagle's feathers as it is thrown through a fireball. However, the image on the cover of the book depicts a single dragon breathing fire on an eagle, where in the lower edge of the scene there are soldiers manning ballistae and catapults, and in the background above them it depicts other dragons and eagles. So yes, the ideas conveyed can be construed as being similar in nature. Dragons and eagles fighting in Middle-earth over the heads of soldiers. However, would this be enough to hold water? Something tells me that it wouldn't. However, we can't rely on a single example alone, so let's move on to the next one. Galadriel becomes a warrior and takes up Finrod's sword, which Polychron claims is his on page 157 of the novel, stating, led her people into the thick of attacking orcs. So, within the show, at this part of the episode, Galadriel is relating through narration that her brother Finrod had attempted to seek out and destroy Sauron, but Sauron found him first and killed him. Galadriel takes the dagger off her brother's body and takes up Finrod's quest to hunt down Sauron, relating to the viewer that centuries passed during her search. However, within the book, it relates something a little different. The book reads, while Celeborn vacillates as to which course they should take, Galadriel donned her mail in armor, taking up her great war spear that she alone had charmed Eöl to forge for her of nearly indestructible Galvorn. She threw off her helm, allowing her long golden white hair to trail shining radiant in the sun, and she led her people charging into the thick of the attacking orcs. The orcs were blindsided. The surprise attack of the elves seemed led by the Vala'arian, free of earthly flesh, burning blindingly bright and hot and carrying her long white spear tipped with deadly black fire. The orcs couldn't even look at her, the light was too bright and burned their eyes, much less stand against the bite of her spear and the force of her attacking Sindarin forces. For additional context in regards to those two paragraphs from the book, Arwen is having remembrances of Numenor through the eyes of Galadriel, apparently through the use of a palantir, where the memory takes place at the end of the First Age. The memory itself is, as you heard, during a battle where Celeborn was having difficulty making a decision, and so Galadriel charged at the enemy orcs with her forces in tow. And realistically, I can't see how this one holds any water in the eyes of Polychron at all. The only similarities between the two, really, is that Galadriel took a weapon. In the Rings of Power, she took a dagger from the hands of her fallen brother while then venturing off on a centuries-long and horrendously written narration of a Middle-earth version of Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. Now, in the other, Polychron's version, she holds a spear as she charges into a horde of orcs during a battle. The situations, intentions of the scenes, everything about these two is completely different in both composition and purpose. The third citation is that each contains a hobbit named Marigold, which, yeah, they both do. However, one would have to conduct a characterization comparison between the two, which would be difficult as Marigold isn't exactly a main character within the Rings of Power, and just because a character is named Adam somewhere doesn't mean that the name Adam can no longer be used anywhere else. It just doesn't work like that.
That's not how it works. That's not how any of this works.
The fourth citation is, in the Rings of Power, there is a person of color hobbit named Malva, and within the book on page 47, there is a group of dark-skinned traders where amongst them was the character, and this is a direct quote from the book, beside Malvis sat the beautiful crown prince Malvia Merkaba. So 2 new characters so far with either identical or 1-letter separation names. However, from my recollection, as I just alluded to in the previous example, character names are not copyrightable. However, I think they may be able to be trademarked, so I'll have to double check that. But as this is a copyright dispute and not a trademark dispute, the only inclusion that these may help with is to aid in a preponderance of data pointing towards copyright infringement. At least I suspect that's what Polychron is going for here. And the next example follows along with the previous 2, where each has a character named Eleanor. However, the next example after that, it appears to be a mistake, as it cites the moment where Bronwyn gives Arendir a vial of Alfirin seeds, spelled Alfirin, which Polychron attributes to the Waters of Awakening. Now in this, Polychron cites page 49 of his book. However, that segment of the book, including a few pages before and also after, makes no mention whatsoever to either Alfirin or the Waters of Awakening. But for a bit of historical context, Tolkien himself, J.R.R., made mention of both Alfirin and the Waters of Awakening himself. And as such, I highly doubt any correlation here, as the Waters of Awakening are a translation of the Elvish word Cuivianen. Now, Cuivianen was where Iluvatar awoke the first elves, where the Sindarin word Alfirin was amended by Tolkien to the 2 parts of Al, meaning not, and Firin, meaning mortal. So this reference within the Rings of Power is a direct reference to J.R.R. Tolkien's work, not Polychron's. Now, his next claim regarding the first episode of the Rings of Power surrounds the War of Wrath, where Polychron's reference within his book is a mere 2 paragraphs before the one excerpt of the book I read previously, where in Polychron's book, which is still the remembrances of Galadriel at the end of the First Age being seen by Arwen through the use of a palantir, somehow, states the forces that Galadriel and Celeborn were leading had been refugees of the War of Wrath. Where in the Rings of Power, Arendir and Revion are discussing the history of the humans Arendir was watching, being they were the descendants of men who followed Morgoth. However, the Rings of Power never used the name the War of Wrath, but even if they did, it would be a massive stretch indeed to call this copyright infringement, as the War of Wrath was contained within the novel The War of Jewels, written by Christopher Tolkien in 1994, well over 20 years before the novel written by Demetrius Polychron. And to be honest, I could continue on citing the examples provided by Polychron, but they really don't get much better from there. The vast majority of examples are either similar through simple common sense, such as the hammer formerly used by a revered smith given a place of honor and put on a pedestal, or are so tangentially related as to come across as completely irrelevant. Now, given what I've seen from comparing Demetrius Polychron's book to The Rings of Power, I can state a few things with confidence. The Rings of Power remains an absolutely god-awful show, and quite literally the first time I've ever seen in history the protagonist convince a companion not to execute— sorry, tangent here, supreme tangent, but this one pissed me off so much I have to say it, I have to put it in here. The protagonist convinces their companion not to execute a prisoner out of revenge, because revenge is bad, only to have that protagonist turn around in the very next scene that they are in, which is less than 5 minutes later in real-world time, and threaten to gleefully commit genocide over that very same prisoner, mildly sassing her. Don't believe me? Actually, you probably do, because we all know the Amazon and their storytelling capabilities within this show are the absolute worst I've ever seen. But I'm going to show you anyways, because if I had to suffer through this, then everyone must suffer.
Halbrand, put it down. One cannot satisfy thirst by drinking seawater. And even if it takes me all of this age, I vow to eradicate every last one of you. But you shall be kept alive, so that one day, before I drive my dagger into your poisoned heart, I will whisper in your piked ear that all your offspring are dead, and the scourge of your kind ends with you.
It would seem I'm not the only elf alive that's being transformed by darkness. Perhaps your search for Morgoth's successor should have ended in your own mirror.
Perhaps I shall begin by killing you. You slavering orc.
Galadriel.
Now that is the levels of god-awful writing that one must endure to create a video such as this. Over 8 hours of crap like that. Now, the second thing I can state with a high degree of confidence is that Demetrius Polychron's lawsuit is about as robust as the capabilities of the Rings of Power's writing team. And there is a very strong possibility that not only did they not infringe upon his copyright, but it may well be the case that he in fact infringed on the copyright of the Tolkien estate and of Middle-earth Enterprises. And as for the book, I mean, it's all right. It's definitely not Tolkien levels of writing and world building, but at the end of the day, it's still better than the Rings of Power. But really, with writing that bad, what else isn't? Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll see you next time.